guys, what is up? And welcome back for yet another episode of the Off Grid podcast. Thank you very much for joining me yet again for another beautiful episode. And guys, guess what? We hit 1,000 plays. Whoa! In the last episode, I was like, we're at like 967. I hope we get to 1,000 plays. We are officially there, which feels really good. It feels really cool to have that 1, a comma, a 0, 0, 0, and just know that there are so many people out there who are enjoying the podcast and gaining something from each episode. It gives me a massive smile. So thanks for coming along and joining me on this ride. This week's episode, I'm joined by Alex Staniforth. He is an ultra endurance runner and the fastest person to run every mountain in England and Wales. He is also the founder of the charity Mind Over Mountains. In this conversation, we talk about Alex's childhood of being bullied, having epilepsy and a stammer, being hit by the Nepal earthquake in 2015 at age 19, whether we are driven by ambition or dragged by insecurity, the quiet decline in people's mental health in today's social media age, and summiting 446 mountains in England and Wales in under 45 days. Hope you guys absolutely love this episode. It's a combination of both physical and mental resilience, and I hope that you guys gain as much from it as I did. Alrighty, on with the podcast. Alrighty, Alex, thank you very much for joining me on the Off Grid podcast, mate.
Hey, it's good to be here. You know, just to have a chance to share adventures and talk about the outdoors is always a good way to spend a Monday. So thanks for having me, Jake.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were just talking about the Lake District and how it's sound like quite sort of a key pillar throughout your life, and certainly is at the moment. What is your relationship to the Lake District? How did it all start? Where did your love for those mountains come from?
Oh, wow. It's been a long journey. I think if we work backwards, so I've been in the Lake District now for, just on the outside, actually. I'm not technically in the national park. I can see it, but can't quite touch it. I've been here for about 6.5 years now. But the reason for wanting to move here wasn't just because of wanting to obviously, to move out of home and have my own place, but was really a bit of a healing, transformational journey for me, really. And that goes all the way back to when I was about 14. I went on my first trip to the lakes with my friend Tom and his family in Keswick, so kind of North Lakes. And that was something I'd never really done before. Like, my parents weren't massively adventurous. We were really lucky that I did lots of nice stuff as a kid. We went away a lot to like North Wales in the caravan and, on the beaches and explored, but not really anything in the mountains. And I was always a very anxious kid. I struggled a lot with anxiety triggered by epilepsy when I was a child, and then I've had a stammer all my life and badly bullied for my entire time at school. So, like, being in the Lake District was something I'd never really seen before, but it just absolutely blew my mind. And just the scale and the beauty and just the freedom I found up there was just something I'd never had. And it kind of became a way to fight back, to really prove myself wrong and find this achievement that I never had at school, and kind of find a way to not let the epilepsy and the bullying and the stammering kind of hold me back. I still remember those early hill walks and just the feelings I can't quite replicate, but just fascination. And when you're that age, you're curious about the world and you realize suddenly there's a whole world out there, and it opens your whole mindset to what's possible. And at some point on one of those walks, I remember asking myself, where is Mount Everest? And it's one of those kind of millennial questions. I went online, went on Google, searched, and I saw some pictures and researched Everest and just became absolutely obsessed and fascinated and in awe of the concept of climbing the world's highest peak and the people who'd done it. I then came across a guy who climbed Everest, who was a guide called Tim Mosdale. And Tim is based in Keswick. He's a climbing instructor. He's now climbed Everest 7 times. I wanted to meet someone, one of these kind of mere mortals who'd been there. So I wanted to go back in the Lake District. So I booked like a rock climbing day. I think it would have been later that year, actually. And God, I must have driven him mad asking him all the questions and like, how can I follow in the footsteps? And when I think back, that was really the early steps towards, making the goal a reality. When I realized what was involved and then started contacting lots of climbers, asking for advice and questions and things. But those early trips to the Lake District were really fundamental for like creating this passion with the outdoors. Um, and that's still with me now. I've just been able to explore it in different ways. And basically, after those initial interactions, like I was taking the steps towards Everest consciously, over a few years. When I eventually went to Everest and things didn't go to plan, I actually moved up here to work at that was a YHA hostel for a few months. Well, actually, I think it wasn't even a few months, um, because being in the Lake District kind of helped me to heal. Dealing with the trauma of the avalanche and the earthquake, it was a really tough thing to go through at 19. And being here, being able to cycle just to be back where it all began, was crucial for me. Um, I would come up here, quite regularly, for hill walking and cycling and climbing and stuff over the years and training for stuff. But then I think it was 2018, I started to drive up here often for like fell running and stuff. And I never really lost that link to the Lake District. And then it was like 2019, pre-pandemic, great timing, as if I knew it was coming. I decided that I decided the time was right and I'd move. And I thought, well, why not move here? So I found a flat in Kendal and took a giant leap. Filled up my car with stuff and drove down the M6, playing Oasis at full blast, and never looked back really. So in short, my relationship since then is it's my home. It's always felt like my home, and I'm just really lucky to be able to explore it in lots of different ways, and it's challenging me and inspiring me even today.
Feels like a trigger almost, something that kind of that set you loose. Particularly, you're talking about being a boy who was, bullied, epilepsy, had a stammer, and I would imagine that you at that time that boy probably felt like quite closed in, like he was stuck in this sort of like system around him in school. And then you're going out to the mountains, you're seeing all these views and feeling that kind of level of literal expansion and as you say, seeing the world. What do you think that feeling was for you as a young boy, and how did those experiences at school and in your childhood shape who you've ended up becoming today?
I think the feeling was just possibility, like realizing there was another choice, there was another way, and that I didn't have to let all this stuff stop me. And when you find that realization, it was just excitement. It was thrilling. It was like, oh my God, like I can do this stuff. I mean, anyone here who's listening who's been up a hill will know the feeling. And I'm sure you've been there when you suddenly realize you're on the top of the mountain and there's nothing else above you, and it's phenomenal. Um, and I think it was about possibility, but also identity. Like I found who I wanted to be, and I found that belonging that I never had, which was in the mountains. And how it shaped me. I mean, all those experiences ultimately have built resilience. They've built a real drive and desire to like achieve as much as I possibly can because I realized what the alternative was. And people often ask me, what drives me and things. And ultimately, I think having adversity in life, it goes one of both ways. You either grow from it or it grows on you. And ultimately, I just used it as fuel to kind of keep raising the bar and keep raising the bar. And actually, then how that shifted is I now basically make a living by talking about that and trying to help other people, and that's a real privilege. But I think when you know how, or where you've been before, and you really don't want to go back there, you will do anything it takes to not do that. That's really what has shaped me to where I am. But also having that realization that actually we are capable of so much more than we think and realize.
I've heard this idea of using negative experiences as fuel to kind of get you out of that particular spot and to kind of keep making you push forward. But at what point do you feel like it's not kind of this drive, but maybe this kind of this dark horse that's kind of maybe a sense of having to like prove people wrong, or this sense of like achievement, or whatever it is. Because I've had similar things in my childhood where I've thought, oh, okay, I'll show you, like, sort of thing. And I think I would have called that drive, but actually, it felt far from that. It felt more like insecurity, sort of,
Mm.
kind of dragging me along. How do you differentiate between the two?
Really good question, and I think you're right. I don't think it is dry. I think it's almost avoidance, or it's like direct competition. Which is a motivator, but it's just not necessarily a very sustainable or very positive one. Um, I definitely relate to that. I think for a very very long time, if I'm really honest, the driver was wanting to raise a big middle finger to all the bullies at school. But more importantly, to do that to myself, and my own inner critic and my own inner doubts, and I got to a point when I realized actually I had nothing left to prove. And when I realized that that kind of like external kind of drive and motivation wasn't sustainable, because, we're never going to please everybody. We're never going to really, truly, get to that point of peace. And ultimately, we have to find that for ourselves. And, we can keep on chasing things and chasing the next goal, or chasing the next career or goal or title, or whatever those kind of things are, because they're very predictable, kind of measures. Like, we can measure success on those things,
Yeah,
to feel like we're moving somewhere. But ultimately, like, that sense of needing to prove it to other people feels like one of those things that we're never quite going to get. So we keep on doing, keep on doing. Um, so I think I realized that after Everest, on when I was on Choa Yu in Tibet in 2016. That's the sixth highest peak in the world. On the way home from the peak, I didn't summit that one because of altitude sickness, and I got to like 7,200 meters. And on the way home, I remember looking at Everest in the distance and just feeling this sense of like just just nothing. Like, there was no excitement or pull or drive towards the mountain anymore. And it was that realization that almost I had nothing left to prove to anyone else anymore. And, ultimately learning to enjoy the process for myself, not just to prove other people wrong. Now, don't get me wrong, there is still part of the childhood Alex in me that likes to prove people wrong. So, for example, when I did the 446 challenge this year, um, I had a couple of people online on social media kind of sort of trolls saying stuff like, "Oh, is Alex going to add this to his collection of DNFs?" And playing on the fact that I failed a lot of things. And I've had sponsors, like, even sponsors that have supported me on challenges, emailing me telling me to stop. And that again could have been like, okay, this is the time to stop. This is gone too far. Like, they've got my best interest at heart. They can see I'm in a lot of pain. Their email was something around the lines of, you know, you're clearly not going to make it, so why not just sort of go home and try again another time? Part of me thought, yeah, but then part of me said, watch this. I like you say, and that actually was exactly what I needed to push me on at that moment. Um, and I often tell people, if you really want to help me, just tell me I can't do it. Um,
wow.
because I love pushing through those limits that I put on myself, but more so that other people put on me. Because it makes me think of those days at school when I was bullied, when I was, verbally and physically abused, and I didn't really have chance to fight back at the time. So this is kind of a way of doing that. Um, Now, obviously, it can't be like that all the time. You've got to have a stronger why, but it's really important that you bring that up, because how do I differentiate? Is basically, if I'm really honest with myself and write down why I'm doing it, if that's what comes up, you know, you need something else.
Absolutely. And it's nice to just speak with someone who's like totally honest about it, because I think we've all got that. We've all, anyone you speak to who is wildly successful, anyone who's like really ambitious and going for stuff, if you dig deep enough, then you'll find out what is really driving them, and what's being that true force. And I don't think it's to say that if someone does have a dark horse, that that person is now kind of less ambitious, or kind of more in an unhealthy way. It's just truthful. It's just, this is the way a lot of our psyches are built. and using it and being conscious of it. I think that's where probably your mindset's able to come in, is noticing it's there and being like, okay, now's the time to tap into that, or now's the time to leave it. And you've spoken on a more sort of wider scale about confidence. It's something that you've spoken about quite a bit as
Hmm.
you've kind of done more and more endurance races and come into your own as a man. And you've spoken, I think, on this topic, which seems to be more and more popular across my social media, is like confidence, and particularly in regards to men's confidence. And at the moment, 47% of men in the UK think that there's a stigma attached to therapy. So I was wondering what it is you think that men in particular at the moment are struggling with.
Oh wow, 47%. I'd say more. But that's a really interesting question. I mean, I'm not an expert on this, and there's lots of great people in this space. Um, I would say, if I think of myself as an example, as a man, I would say struggling with that sense of comparison, that sense of social kind of society norms. Like when I get to this point, when I get to this age or this milestone, I should be somewhere. I'm not this. There's all sorts of stresses around sort of body image, financial success. I think purpose is the thing that a lot of people are struggling with. And if I look at myself, the times when I've struggled the most, including recently, is loss of purpose and identity. And that purpose is what gives you the reason to get out of bed in the morning. It gives you a reason for life, and I see that a lot in people, and also people I coach as well comes up a lot. People dealing with that sense of like, who am I? What's this all about? Um, and confidence, I think, stems from that, because if you don't really know who you are or why you're doing it, it's very hard to be confident in that. And I think social media has a massive role to play. I'm increasingly kind of moving away from social media because I find it's takes us away from genuine connection and more into this like kind of followers likes kind of equation, which I don't think is good for us, which basically gets us into this mindset of like, we are only as worthy as our success, and when we're not getting kind of validation for that, we're not really validating ourselves. Um, and I didn't phrase that in a very good way, but ultimately, like, we're almost having this constant mirror to ourselves. And, I think that's stopping us sitting with the uncomfortable things and constantly never being enough. And that's something I've certainly experienced and dealt with as well. As for mental health side of things, I mean, I've openly had lots of therapy and counseling and support since I've been a teenager. And I've seen perhaps a shift recently that more and more men seem to be open about that. There are a lot more advocates online, which is fantastic. It's almost gone the other way. There's almost so much out there that it can be quite overwhelming. Um, so I think work is being done, things are changing. But given the stats that we're seeing, how suicide is the biggest killer of people under 35 in the UK, three-quarters of them are men. Clearly, there's a lot that needs to be done. And I do think this whole sense of purpose and success thing is really dragging a lot of people down.
So where do we start with that? First of all, when I hear that word, I'm just like, well, what is it? People talk about, find your purpose or find your passion. A lot of these questions I found in my own experience quite confusing, because I'm like, okay, well, clearly there's an answer to this question, so I haven't got the right answer because I don't know what it is. And most of my existence has felt like I'm just constantly trying to figure it out. So what would you say purpose is, and how do people go about finding it?
I think, to your point there, is something that we're always still figuring out. There isn't really a right or wrong answer to it, and it will change. Like, I've noticed a lot of shifts on my journey where it's changed a few times. And simply to me, again, I'm not an expert on this at all. Is purpose is just our kind of reason to be here. It's sort of the thing that gets us out of bed in the morning. And some people, it might be their family. For me, for a long time, it was trying to, achieve massive things in the outdoors and adventures, and it was those continual challenges. Some people, it might be their job, and I think it could be a few things, but ultimately, the way I would define purpose is just that something that we are striving towards. It's not something we achieve. It's never like a goal. It's something that we are constantly kind of working towards almost. Um, I don't know if that helps with the confusion at all. I get there is a lot out there, and a lot of it is kind of used interchangeably. So a lot of people maybe don't know what it is, but ultimately, I think it's feeling like we're aligned with something. Um, and I think that's why a lot of people may have struggled in the pandemic, is because people lost, their jobs, they lost a lot of their hobbies. Some people, sadly lost their family and friends because of it. And I think a lot of that left people almost kind of losing a bit of themselves as well.
I think it it could be said that quite a lot of people, including myself, look at what you have achieved. They see you for your Instagram profile, they see you for your achievements, doing all these incredible endurance races and holding the medal and being a founder of a charity and being a coach, being an international inspirational speaker and all the sorts of things. Um, what do you think people maybe don't see behind all of the achievements and everything you've done? So for those who look at you and go, "Oh, he's got so much purpose. He clearly knows what he's doing in the world. How come I don't have that?" What would you say to that person?
Blimey. Well, I think a lot of the things I've been lucky to have, and the opportunities that I have now, and the kind of ecosystem that I've built with, with the work and the charity and the ventures, like it's all been done intentionally. And a lot of it came from what happened to me on Everest. That gave me an insight that is very unusual. Not many people will experience that at 19 years old. And I'm very grateful for that. And I'm not saying that everyone has to go and have a near death experience to find out what's important to them, but that was one of those things that happened to me that I consider myself very fortunate for. Um, so what I would say to those people is I still have the same doubts, maybe imposter syndrome, maybe lack of confidence, comparison that we all feel. And I look at other people that may be doing much bigger things, or faster runners than me, or people that are raising a lot more money than me, or people with a much bigger influence than me, and more books and more speaking gigs than me. Everyone is comparing themselves up the ladder. And so, people may say to me, "Oh, yeah, it looks really good that you get to speak around the world and things, and like you get to do this and that." But what they don't see is the doubt, the exhaustion, the imposter syndrome every time I stand on stage. They don't see the anxiety that comes with that. They don't see the panic attacks. Um, and I'm sharing this openly because I want people to realize that that actually this is a lot of why I'm stepping away from social media, is because I just don't think it's genuine. I don't think there's enough reality on there. Um, and and so I would want people to see that I'm human just like anyone, and if I can be on a stage in front of like 500 people, and I could be coaching people on imposter syndrome and mindset and doubt. Whereas I'm sat there thinking, why don't I listen to this advice? This sounds really good. um, so I would say is that ultimately comparison is the thief of joy. And I need to tell this to myself, but I don't feel like I've achieved anywhere near as much as I should have done. Um, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's so much more I could say on that.
I mean, there's obviously the point there you made about like people kind of not realizing all the things that would happen with the panic attacks and things like that. Um, but you also mentioned about imposter syndrome. Now that kind of strikes me as unusual only because you're talking about your lived experience, and it's so what is it that you feel imposter syndrome about when you're doing these talks?
It's not just on the speaking angle. I'd say probably feeds a lot into the adventure angle and like the sports and the training and stuff as well that I do. Definitely the coaching, more so the coaching because I'm so new to it, and it's something I've got a lot more passion for, but perhaps less practice in. And I would say it is just partially in my nature, being very much a high achiever type mentality. Like I want to be in the top 1%. And, I see myself speaking at conferences and things, and then I like might be like a morning speaker, and then there's a speaker at the end of the day who's getting like a standing ovation, and I'm like, well, I want to be there, but actually I'm not good enough to be there. And I think bullying and any adverse childhood experiences very much can be the root of that. And they take work, and they don't necessarily go away, but they become a regular feedback loop and narrative, that's hard to change. But it is ultimately the case of I've got a stammer. How on earth can I speak to these people? How can I speak to these leaders about success when, I've failed this, I've failed that, I've done this, I'm not very good at this. Um, all the internal narratives that we all have. I think ultimately it is just because I am just a normal person. I've not had a proper business background or a proper job, so it's like, how can I speak to business leaders about, performance and resilience? But at the same time, the imposter syndrome's there, but it's not stopping me doing anything. That's the crucial thing. Is there, but I'd actually say I deal with it quite well. In that, I notice it. But for me, imposter syndrome is actually a sign of competence because it's a sign that we really care about the result, and it's a sign that actually we're continually trying to develop and improve and build on what we are. Um, so I notice it as a trait of what's necessary. Like so many high performers and athletes we've heard of have the same problem. They mentioned it as well. Um, and I think again, when you're in a field which is very busy and there's a lot of fantastic people out there, it's very easy to think we're not good enough.
It's kind of like a theme almost. I see it everywhere. These sort of buzzwords popping up, with like, self affirmations in the mirror saying that you are good enough, and imposter syndrome and all things like this. And sometimes it's almost that's the stuff that almost makes me tired of social media. Is just the kind of like constantness of it all. That like, like you are you anxious, or are you suffering with anxiety? Like, because anxiousness is a very normal emotion to feel, particularly if you've got something that you care about, and
Mm,
going onto a podcast, or doing a talk, or whatever it is. Um, is there a point where you feel like, obviously, you want to be as real as possible, you want to show your real self, and do these talks, but if you're not on social media, maybe you wouldn't get the talks and you wouldn't get the gigs. So how can you show people this real sense of self without kind of doing all the buzzwords and making sure that you're relevant with the algorithm on social media?
mm. I think it's remembering that that's not my only platform. I mean, Instagram being probably the worst. LinkedIn is very busy for me with my coaching and my speaking work, and I use that in a different way. And could be equally challenging. Um, my answer to that is I simply don't care too much about the algorithm. I've stopped trying to follow all the rules and all the tricks and trends around social media because I just think from a mental health basis, it's so difficult. I mean, every week or every day we'll probably see someone announcing that they're having a break from social media. If we're having to have a break from it, it probably isn't a good thing. Now I know obviously we all need a break from work and we still have to work, but um, ultimately if something's we happen to take a break from it, it's clearly not good for us. And to your question though, I mean, it's not the only place I show up. I mean, if I'm booked for a talk, I might speak to a conference. Like I speak at an event on Friday to, over 200 teachers, to 130 students on Wednesday online. Most of that doesn't come to me through social media. A lot of it comes through existing contacts and various things. Um, and ultimately, I do very little and decided to do like no more kind of brand collabs and things because everyone's selling the soul to the devil. And I just find I can see straight through it now. And I just want to be a person who's not trying to sell anything other than a story. Um, Now, when it comes to writing books, I mean, I'm working on a third book at the moment, and I think, oh, I'm going to have a social media presence when the book comes out to sell the book. And increasingly, the publishing world relies on authors having a social media presence, but not everyone. And we think about how it used to be. It's clearly possible. It's clearly possible. Um, but ultimately, I think the challenge with social media is almost with doing things because people are watching. What would we do if no one was watching? And that's an important question. Actually, I'd probably just kind of travel and run everywhere. But with the charity, again, that's its own entity. Like we have a brilliant team now who run that. I'm the founder in the background, so that I'm not needed in that regard. I share my stories in lots of other ways than just on social media. And for sure, what's lovely about it is the people you meet. You know, the people who message you and say, just wanted to say, I'm really struggling, but your post or your story has really helped me. That's what it should be about. Unfortunately, to get that, you also have to have all the negative stuff as well. And you can filter that to the best of your ability. Like, I met my girlfriend through social media. I've met so many fantastic friends and people. This podcast probably happened because of that as well. Um, so I think using it selectively, but ultimately being very aware of it when we're sat there scrolling and feeling our mood going down and down and down and our confidence going down and down. Um, People use it to talk about mental health and difficult times with reality and authenticity, which is really good. But if you're not having a good time, you might not want to hear that. You might just want to watch cat memes. I don't know, um,
Yeah, it's a myriadic world that we're all trying to work out.
yeah,
And you spoke earlier about a situation that definitely wasn't recorded, but something that you've spoken about at length is when you were stuck on Camp One in the Nepal earthquake, 2015. And you said at the time, obviously, you stuck on Camp One for 2 days. What was that experience like, particularly as a teenager?
yeah. I mean, there was no social media, so it's great. Sorry, I've that rant is finished. I won't go. I won't move on with that one. I mean, to be honest, at the time I was kind of in survival mode. For context, we just had the big earthquake in Nepal. We had been hit by a big powder avalanche, so we didn't really know the extent of what was going on at this point. We're trapped at 6,000 meters. We've got food for a day or 2 days at most because we weren't meant to be at Camp One for more than one night before we moved to Camp Two, and we were told we could be here for a week. Because the only way down was helicopter because the route back down was just gone through all the damage from the avalanche and the earthquake. Um, and so when I think back to it, I mean, it's more than 10 years ago now, this year being the big anniversary. I was kind of in survival mode, but at the same time, I'd kind of given up. I just lay there like a vegetable for 2 days because at that point, obviously, the goal had gone. So there wasn't the big thing to aim for. But ultimately, you just don't care anymore. And therefore, staying hydrated, staying fueled was no longer as important. But also, I think part of it was a shock response. It was definitely a shock response. And that can affect people in lots of different ways. The people on our team who were kind of military or sort of, sort of medically trained, they handled it really well, as they would. I just kind of gave up. And my tent mate was like forcing me to eat and drink, like no matter how much I complained, so that I was keep myself in a position that I could get myself off the hill. Um, and so we had a great team of people, and there was a lot of Gurkhas up there who were the best people to have around when you stuck 6,000 meters up a mountain. But I just remember a lot of the like hopelessness. Like I called home on the satellite phone. I was the only one in our team who actually had one who was like, sort of sharing it out and made me very popular at Camp One at the time. And just calling my mum and her being really excited to hear from me and having to tell her, we'd just been hit by an avalanche and hearing her like, it gives me goosebumps even now. Um, just telling her there's been this earthquake and she's crying and swearing at me down the phone and just feeling completely helpless and guilty that there's nothing either of us can do. But it's a case of, look, this has happened. We just got to focus on what we can do. How do we deal with this? Um, yeah. So that was the key memory for me, really, was that sense of hopelessness, but also trying to find the best in the situation, you know. And one of our teammates, Ingo, was walking around his pants asking if the Wi Fi was still working, classic.
Wow, it's amazing how different people react to these extreme environments. And I think anyone who hasn't been through it, they just simply can't relate to what that must be like. How how is it in these very extreme moments that different people react? And what did you learn from the
Mm.
people there at Camp One?
Again, there's probably psychology experts that can explain more about this, but I think there is the concept of post-traumatic growth, and people are not born resilient, but we are more resilient due to the things that we've been experienced and we've been trained to experience, and we've obviously built our own tools and mechanisms for that. Um, so as I said, the people who've been in the military were a lot calmer because they kind of been exposed to that before. But you can't train for an avalanche. You can't really practice or do anything for that. So I'd imagine some of it is like it's inbuilt, but it wasn't an age thing because there was people on my team who were a lot older and stronger than me that were literally just like frozen, shaking and crying. I felt I coped pretty well, um, and some people just went straight into action mode, totally unflappable. Were brilliant. As to why it happens, I think ultimately it's a lot based on our personalities, um, the ability to live in the moment. For me, anxiety is often in the future. It's being two steps ahead. And that's why obviously mindfulness is such a powerful tool for anxiety because it brings us back into the present. And I'm also, a very anxious person, but what I've learned through these expeditions, my challenges, is just to take it one day at a time. The people that were always very much, okay, what's going to happen on summit day were the ones who fell apart. Um, and the people that were very relaxed were the same in the avalanche. So I don't know why it is, but I would imagine it is prior experiences as well as personality. And I mean, shock is a genuine thing. It has an effect on people, and um, some people froze, some people just went into action mode.
How would you describe how it shaped you? Because you're such a young man at that time, and you're
Mm.
kind of learning from other people's reactions around you. And you talk about this concept of, post-traumatic growth. How would you say that has played a role in your life and shaped the character you are today?
I think at 19, it really showed me what's important and what isn't important, and I'm really grateful for that. And obviously, I'm not grateful for what happened. I mean, 9,000 people died in Nepal, including 3 of our team, and that guilt has carried with me ever since. But I think what it did give me was that insight into how fragile life is. And almost, I remember coming down to base camp and looking at my tent, buried under this like foot of ice and rock, and just thinking to myself, had I not left base camp this morning, I wouldn't be here. Simple as that. But also, had I been in that tent, ripped apart like a piece of paper, what would I have left behind? And that sense of kind of legacy. And this is why when we go back to purpose to me is, it's about achieving, extraordinary things by my own standards, but also by leaving something bigger than myself, by trying to create that legacy. And obviously that's not like it's not like a marathon where I can say, right, my goal is to run sub 2:30. I can't tick it off. You can't measure it. It's just a feeling. But having that at 19, sort of thing that a lot of people don't realize until they're in the 40s or 50s when they think, oh, bugger, what's this all about? Like, what have I been doing for the last 20 years? And so it's allowed me to steer my life in the way that I wanted to and to really maximize my full potential, if that makes sense. Um, but it also makes me appreciate life, not to waste a day. If I have a day where I'm not productive, honestly, I'm infuriated with myself. That's my partner because I'm like stressed out because I know that that could change. And people say, "Oh, you've got lots of time yet." I'm like, really? I don't think it matters how old we are. I think it's how alive we are. And that's what it's given me. I think. At the same time, it kind of gave me a bit of an unhelpful benchmark because like everything needs to be at the top level, but that isn't sustainable all the time. So I'm kind of a little bit. I found more peace with that over the years.
Yeah, I was just thinking this idea of constantly needing to be productive the whole time.
Mm.
That's impossible.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's why I run a lot because it gives you that sense of that sense of achievement every day and accomplishment. And productive is subjective to everyone. My unproductive day might be really productive to some people, but I'm I'm a runner. I just like pushing myself.
Yeah, and it seems to be so much more than running for you. This it really seems like there's needing to get away and proving people and achievement and productivity. Um, what do you think life would be like for you if running was eliminated?
Very miserable. Like, it's a way of life for me. When I'm injured, that's the worst because that's when I see what it would be like. Not having that escape, the endorphins from a mental health basis. It's like a top up every single day. It just lets the lid off all the steam and the thoughts, allows you to process things. Um, I've been quite lucky that I've had a pretty consistent year, but when I've had long periods of no running before, I really had to confront a lot of uncomfortable stuff. Like when I had long COVID in 2022, um, I realized that, okay, it wasn't as bad as I thought because as an athlete, there's no bigger fear than being unable to do the thing that you love doing. But it forced me to build new coping mechanisms. Like I was doing a lot of hiking and open water swims, and that's removed the fear of being injured as much as it used to be. It used to be it used to feel like a death sentence. Honestly, it was a bit over the top. But now I'm much better at dealing with that when it happens. Like I've got a race on Saturday, and now my knee's really hurting me, and like, thinking, I don't want to miss my race, but I'm not as panicking as I would have been a few years ago. Um, I think ultimately running is just a form of expression. So I would find another way of doing that. We all have coping tools. Some of them are less healthy, but running is a healthy one of those. It's less and less now about proving things and challenging limits because, how far can that go? Only very few of us are going to be like, winning gold in the Olympics. And I'm probably past that at my age now. To be the best I possibly can be, and that is a very good target because I'm not trying to run to someone else's standards. But I'm always been driven by being the best I possibly can be, and that can be defined by me whether that's trying to run a certain time in a race or to win a race. That's not a great target because I don't know who else is going to turn up. I can only train as hard as I can train. Um, but I think if without having that daily regular processing thing, I think life would be really dull and it'd be a real struggle. And I would have to find another way of expressing myself. But running is the only sport that I'm kind of like built for. So if it wasn't running, I don't know what it would be, to be honest.
Yeah, that's clearly a really core part of who you are. And I've been injured the last 6 months, and I used to run every day, and I feel that it's on a biological level crazy how much your body relies on those endorphins every day, and how your
Mhm.
way of feeling yourself is almost dependent on the
Mhm.
activity of running itself.
Yeah.
But I'm totally as well agree on this point. You draw the connection between nature and therapy, and how now you're the founder of your charity Mind Over Mountains. That getting into nature, moving the body, is a big part of being able to get back in touch with ourselves. And this year, more recently, you summited 446 mountains in England and Wales in under 45 days. So I was wondering, how was that very long therapy session for you?
Oh, it was great, great value for money, honestly. Um, just to your point there, for me, yeah, movement is medicine for sure. And this is what the charity was created for, because I didn't want people to have to wait for months or years on a waiting list like I did, and we're not preaching on the podcast that, go outside and you'll be cured. It's a tool, it's something we have to use regularly to get the benefit for. Um, Now, doing a challenge of that length, 45 days non-stop is obviously at the extreme end of things. Just a caveat, you don't need to do that to get the benefits. And the sole purpose of it was the fundraising, and the physical challenge, um, rather than the very benefit. But for sure, like the 45 days, you're out there for long enough to have that full reset where kind of my life revolves around just running and cycling every day. And I've done a few adventures now which have been like quite long term, and I seem to like kind of human powered stuff now. Um, my mum prefers that too, and in that time, you really get to reconnect with yourself because you're spending enough time in your own head in different places, and it's interesting because life almost becomes a bit of a trance. Life becomes so simple, you know, and I can't say I enjoyed the whole thing. It was tough. It was really hard. I was waking up in the motorhome every morning. It might be pouring down with rain or wind and storms, and I've got to go out anyway. And I did not want to be outside those days. And those days, honestly, were probably more damaging for my mental health than good, because I was suffering for 10, 11 hours in wind and rain, and having, complete meltdowns where it all got too much. But when I have those days, I think that's an important kind of metaphor for mental health in general, is things do get better. This too shall pass. And I kept saying, oh, that was the worst day of my life. But actually, when I came to another bad day, I thought, actually, it wasn't as bad as that day. So actually, this is a good day, you know. And it also does make you more resilient in the long term. In the short term, it was massively stressful, and there were so many good moments where I'm on a hill, sun's out, I'm looking down and just feeling a sense of awe and gratitude. And that was a regular word, was just gratitude. When I was having the good days, it was massively good. But I also had a lot of time to reflect and self-awareness and make a lot of sort of big life decisions, whilst I was on the challenge. So I was there with this job to do. Um, and when you're doing the challenge, you kind of crave the ability to just not be in a race every day, just to stop and sit in a coffee shop or just watch kind of some rubbish on YouTube. But then when I'm back home, I crave that. I crave the adventure, the simplicity of it. Now, obviously, we can't all live like that in the modern world, realistically. But now, just having those outdoor moments without an agenda, without trying to race myself or beat a time, um, is important. But also, I was trying to capture that for the audience, because a massive part of fundraising is telling a story and getting people involved. So you're kind of living it through other people's eyes as well, not just your own. Um, and that's the difference. If I was to do this over 6 months or whatever, I would have enjoyed it, taking the moment in. But this was a race. I was trying to get around in 45 days because I couldn't take 6 months off work. So um, that was a byproduct, but it wasn't the main aim, if that makes sense. It definitely wasn't a holiday. But what it has taught me is, well, it hasn't taught me anything. It's reminded me of how beautiful our country is, and those moments of awe when you're just in the mountains and you feel so small and you just kind of bounce around in the sunset, and it's just beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, and that's it's lovely to hear people who love the UK, because I love it for the exact same reason. Jump in a
Mm,
car, be somewhere completely different with different people. Um, and what you noted there, that idea that like overall mental health and mental resilience can actually come from suffering. And I think
mm,
feels like almost a point, a wider point that you've been speaking about in your life as well. And that, just because if you are suffering, or you're struggling on a particular day or month or year, that's not to say that it's weakness. It could actually be like your ultimate strength, and be like the thing that really gives you that mental fortitude. I mean, if you look at anything hard, if you look at anything that's worthwhile, it's because it's so hard to achieve. For that
mhm.
very reason, it's a prerequisite, is that it is a level of suffering in order to achieve that. Uh, what do you make of that?
I think that's spot on. I mean, what I would say though is, I mean, I would say any kind of mental health struggles is never a weakness, but I think it's accepting that with or without a diagnosed mental health problem, we're all going to have bad days. And the problem is when there's a lot more bad days than there are good days. And those are times when we all need support, whether that's from a friend or, a mental health, therapist, or getting that, professional support. Um, it's when it's a more chronic long-term thing, that's the problem. But ultimately, having those tough moments is what gives us experience. And that experience is what gives us confidence that when we're there in the future, okay, I've been here before, I've got this, I can do this, and we know we can get through it again. The things with the challenges is they get harder and harder, or longer, or faster, or bigger. Therefore, we're in new ground every time. And as you say, if it wasn't, if it was easy, if it wasn't scary, I would be more worried. Like, what's the point? Because we're not going anywhere we've kind of not been before. Um, so I think the challenge, of course, is when there's no like break. If you do things challenge after challenge after challenge, if there's no kind of like recovery reflection period, then we just get ground down, and we burn out. So that's the key thing, and that's why after big challenges, I always take a long time off. People were asking me downhill belling, "Oh, what's next?" I was like, "It's not even been a week, you know." Um, and like I'm not being rushed into that, you know. And now I'm just doing whatever I feel like because that's what recharges me. But yeah, I think in the long term, like I even had this actually painted on my wall when I was a kid. The greatest suffering brings the greatest successes.
Okay. All right. Well, look, I think in this conversation, it's clear that so much of your experiences to do with suffering and mental resilience have kind of been opened up for me to see and for people to hear about what's actually behind that and what that can do to someone and change them. And you've got that beautiful connection between doing the hard stuff and understanding how it's changed you and what that really means for you. So thanks a lot for sharing your story.
Oh no, it's been a pleasure. You know, thank you for having me and for holding the space. And you know, this just to have a conversation. You know, I'm definitely not an expert, but I always love the opportunity to actually, like as you say, just to look back and try and unpick kind of what's going on and why and how. And definitely excited to do that with more people. You know, as a coach as well on this new journey. But yeah, thanks for having me.
Cheers, Alex.